Who and when started the war in Ukraine? Hello there, this is Elena, and this is my channel Enough, and Enough of Propaganda, English version of it. Let's see, it is almost 10 months right now. Small country of Ukraine is withstanding a full-scale invasion from the biggest country in the world, and the nuclear power at that, Russia. Today we'll find out who and when started this war, and just the facts. So the war started not in February 2022, it started in 2014. I call it kind of first war in Ukraine, because it wasn't full-scale invasion then. During that time, I personally tracked information from many different sources, watched dozens of hours of private videos and news and compared them. It was through the example of that war that I realized how exactly we were lied to and brainwashed in the USSR. I am originally from the USSR, I was born there, and I am originally from Russia. Now I live 18 years in Canada. And I'm an expert on the war in Ukraine. Putin has not invented, in this case, anything new. He uses the same classic techniques of the USSR, and these techniques are falsification of data, intimidation of the population, whataboutism, demagogy, and many other manipulative tactics. Let's look at the facts, as it is. Number one, in 1994, the Russian Federation signed the Budapest Memorandum. On December 5th, 1994, the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, United States, and the Great Britain signed the Memorandum of Security Assurances, so-called the Budapest Memorandum. Under this agreement, Ukraine transferred the world's third largest nuclear weapons stockpile to Russia, in exchange for the commitment by Russia, Britain, and the United States to respect the independence, sovereignty, and existing borders of Ukraine. China and France give security assurances for Ukraine in separate documents. And I'll show you the document. You're welcome to read it. It's not big, it's just 6 points in it. This is text of Budapest Memorandum. You're welcome to read it for yourself. As I said, just 6 points in it. All 4 countries signed this document, and even Putin agreed with this. In an interview with Germany's ARD channel, television, in August 2008, Vladimir Putin stated that Russia recognizes all of Ukraine's borders that existed at the time. So since, like in my previous video, we were talking about Ukraine became not the Republic of the USSR, but independent country. So these borders Putin recognized. He stated that these borders would not be revised and said that there is no issue of ethnic conflict in Crimea, which is part of Ukraine. So there was no question about that Crimea should be part of Russia. I'll show you in a separate video about Crimea a little bit more and about Donbass as well. Let's see what Putin has to say. This is my channel Enough, and this is basically my new channel in English, which I will post this video on. But this playlist will still stay here, which you can see everything I'm talking about. This video where Putin admits Crimea belonged to Ukraine. That is, I translated Putin's speech personally myself in here. If you let me answer the question, you will be satisfied. Crimea is not a disputed territory. But I think would be more useful if you can watch this video in Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is, it has English subtitles, so I think that would be better. When the journalist asking question of Putin that the French Foreign Minister, Mr. Kouchner, recently expressed concern, he's saying,
Французский министр иностранных дел и председатель ЕС господин Кушнер выразил недавно озабоченность, что следующим конфликтом может быть Украина, а именно Крым и Севастополь как база российского военно-морского флота. Является ли Крым и Севастополь такой целью для России?
Вы сказали следующей целью. У нас не было и здесь никакой цели. Поэтому считаю, говорить о какой-то следующей цели некорректно. Это первое.
Вы это исключаете?
Если вы мне позволите ответить, то вы будете удовлетворены. Значит, Крым не является никакой спорной территорией. Там не было никакого этнического конфликта, в отличие от конфликта между Южной Осетией и Грузией. И Россия давно признала границы сегодняшней Украины. Мы, по сути, закончили в целом и в общем наши переговоры по границе. Речь идет о демаркации, но это же технические дела.
Ukraine's decision to sign the Budapest Memorandum was proof of the Ukrainian nuclear disarmament. It was an exemplary case of nuclear non-proliferation. Even the Budapest Memorandum, as some law scholars and politicians said, refers to assurances, but unlike guarantees, it doesn't impose a legal obligation of military assistance of its parties. And the United States publicly maintains that the memorandum isn't legally binding, calling it a political commitment. Nevertheless, it was a promise, a commitment which Russia signed. Putin agreed with it, and he broke that promise. Second, Russia's attack on Ukraine actually began in 2014, when Putin brought into Ukraine insignia-less troops, seized Crimea and two territories in the Donbass. Crimea later was annexed into the Russian Federation, in Putin's opinion, and the world never recognized it. The illegal annexation of Crimea to Russian Federation, the invasion into territory of Donbass, and the creation of two illegal states there, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, DPR and LPR respectively, followed. It was aggression and a gross violation of the norms of international law. That is how the war in Ukraine has started. And here are the proofs. Let's talk about a person, Igor Girkin Strelkov. He's a Russian citizen, and he was an FSB officer who was military leader of the Donetsk People's Republic, so-called DNR or DPR, Donetsk People's Republic, in 2014. He claims that he was the one who fired the first shots, and he started the war in Ukraine. Girkin Strelkov is also responsible for that fake referendum in Crimea. And I'll show you the piece of his own speech, which you will find out that why it was fake referendum. And also for knocking down the plane MH17 by a Russian supplied Buk missile. Recently, Girkin, aka Strelkov, was found guilty of murder and intentionally causing the downing of the plane Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 by the court in Hague. And this is what Girkin has to say personally. I translated it from the Russian newspaper, kind of media, where Girkin said it, and it was printed. His words were printed, so I translated it previously in one of my videos about Girkin. You're welcome to see the video itself. But here I'm showing you him personally on camera admitting it and saying that exact words. That's what he was. These are the words of his which was published. And this is a part of video made by Ukrainians. Why I'm using this? It's because I verified that information. I saw the pieces of videos they showing in this big video. It's called 8 years. What about Russian propaganda is not talking about, is not saying? What's Russian propaganda isn't saying? Basically, I seen all of this in different videos, in independent videos of people posting on YouTube or in news channels in 2014 and 2015. I verified it all back then. That is why I'm showing it to you now. This journalist is asking question of Mr. Girkin Strelkov.
Суть вам следующие слова, которым вы охарактеризовали конфликт на Украине. Спусковой крючок войны все-таки нажал я. Если бы наш отряд не перешел границу, в итоге все бы кончилось как в Харькове, как в Одессе. Было бы несколько десятков убитых, обожженных, арестованных. На этом бы и кончилось.
This is the question I just told you a little bit ahead. It's basically he's asking, did you say that I pulled the trigger of the war? And the quote I mentioned to you.
Это мои слова, я их сказал Пороханову еще в 2014 году, да?
Girkin is saying, yes, it's my words. I said it to Prokhanov in 2014.
В принципе, в них содержится правда.
In these words, there is truth. These words are true, basically, he's saying.
Я говорил то, что считаю правдой.
I said what I consider it to be true.
Действительно, если бы наш отряд не пришел на Донбасс и не стал бы ядром сопротивления, ядром русской весны.
For sure, if my detachment didn't came to Donbass, it didn't become the like a nut has a shell and it has a thing inside the real nut. Like, if it wouldn't be the key for that spring of so-called independence or something like that. So his detachment crossed the border and became the organizing force of the rebellion in Ukraine. That's what Girkin Strelkov is saying.
На Донбассе, то, скорее всего, без этого ядра русская весна была бы подавлена в зародыше.
He is saying that without his troops in Donbass, he is thinking that so-called Russian Spring would have been squashed back then. What he is failing to say that there was no Russian Spring. Nothing was happening there at all before he and his troops and his people came to Donbass. Nothing was going there. There is nothing beside maybe few protests here and there about something, but nobody was killed, nobody was bombed, nothing was going on before he came into Donbass. This is my video from my channel. It said, Russian FSB officer Strelkov admits, I started the war in Ukraine. In this video, first of all, Girkin Strelkov is talking about the war in Ukraine and Crimea. And he's stating that his troops, under the threat of the guns, drove the deputies of Ukrainian Crimean parliament into the room and make them vote that in Crimea there is a necessity to have a referendum about separating Crimea from Ukraine and giving Crimea to Russia.
Я не увидел, к сожалению, никакой поддержки органов государственной власти в Симферополе, где я конкретно находился.
To my big disappointment, I have not seen any support of the authorities in Simferopol where I was.
Не увидел.
I haven't seen it.
Не было ее. Депутатов собирали ополченцы.
The separatists gathered the deputies of the local parliament.
Чтобы загнать их в зал, чтобы они приняли. Чего уж там говорить.
To be honest, they just grabbed the deputies of the local parliament and forced them into the room for they make a decision about referendum. The machine guns.
Да, я был одним из командиров этих ополченцев. Я это все видел изнутри.
Well, he didn't say just now about machine guns. He said there was a commander of those separatist troops, a Russian citizen, FSB officer Girkin Strelkov, saying himself right now that he was a commander of those green men with the guns, because we saw them in the videos, they were with the guns. And he's saying that they were forcing the deputies of the Crimean parliament into the room to make a decision that they need a referendum. In this video, I'm proving by showing you the investigation of the Bellingcat Insider that at the time it all was happening, Girkin Strelkov wasn't an independent person, he was an FSB officer. According to the Bellingcat Investigation Team and the Insider, Igor Girkin Strelkov, who was military leader of the Donetsk People's Republic in 2014, and also Igor Plotnitsky, who was head of the Lugansk People's Republic from 2014 to 2017, Navalny's poisoners and the killer on the bicycle, all of them are linked by common FSB passport series. It proves that Igor Girkin Strelkov and Igor Plotnitsky were sent to Ukraine by FSB. The invasion of Crimea and the two territories on Donbass, Ukraine, in 2014 by Russia was aggression, as I said, and a gross violations of the norms of international law. The investigation of Bellingcat proved that it was Russia, it was FSB. And Igor Girkin Strelkov was always claiming that he was independent person. No, he was acting FSB officer at the time, or he wouldn't have traveling with FSB issued passport. It's proved beyond any doubt. Strelkov said, A. He and his troops, Russian citizens, forcibly drove Crimean deputies, members of parliament, under the threat of the guns, to the room to vote for the referendum on succession from Ukraine. B. The Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, illegal states, so-called Donetsk People and Lugansk People Republics, could not become parts of Russia, like Crimea, only because there was no Russian army in these territories in 2014. So according to Girkin Strelkov, Crimea became Russian only because of the presence of Russian army there, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. In 2014, Putin sent in insignia-less troops and seized Crimea. Girkin Strelkov played a key role in it, and he personally admits it, and he's proud of himself. I confirm what Girkin Strelkov has to say because I was watching very closely in many different sources what was happening back at the time. And that is true. Whatever Strelkov said about that. He did start it. That was Russian citizens and Russian troops. Also, it wasn't just a few separatists led by Girkin Strelkov who appeared in Crimea. Strelkov claiming it was 21st February of 2014. It was not just them. It was regular Russian army. Russia brought troops and weapons to Donbass, the territory of the independent country Ukraine, in 2014. And later, it was Russian army in Ukraine. There are proofs that Russian army was committing war crimes there, and it was shelling both sides of like Ukrainian army and the people of so-called DPR and LPR on several occasions, and I will show you a little bit of proofs of that. Ukrainians are free will and independent people, and they are fighting for their freedom. Ukraine was a part of the USSR in the past, and all the weapons it had until recently, until a few months into the full-scale invasion, when some countries started to provide them with some defensive weapons, and now even some more long-range weapons. All Ukraine had was old Soviet weapons. Russia can and could and did shoot at Ukraine even from Russian territory, and Ukraine cannot do that. Ukraine needs help from the world because it stands between Russian fascist dictatorship and the free world. Russia is the fascist. Putin is a fascist dictator and terrorist who is holding African countries, for instance, hostages by not letting Ukrainian grain to be delivered to them. Putin is bombing the civilians in Ukraine and admitting it publicly, as you can see in my videos as well. The world needs to help Ukraine and continue helping Ukraine and stop Putin. Putin will not stop by himself. We have to stop him. And for that, we need to help Ukraine. Please help Ukraine. Thank you for watching and have a great evening.